Listen, you are not alone. There are things watching, listening, and waiting. Do you dare to open your eyes, open your ears, and let these haunting stories find you? If you dare, continue. But don't blame me if you regret it. The unknown number. It scares me the most that he was in our house and under my bed for 4 days. The most horrifying experience that ever happened to me didn't even directly happen to me. I have a friend that I'll call Ty. We would hang out or at least text every day. But there was this one day when he didn't respond to any of my texts or calls. I went over to his house, which was just a block away, to see if he was all right. I knocked and rang, but he didn't answer, which was weird because his car was there. I got the feeling he wanted to be left alone. But late that night, I got a FaceTime request from an unknown number. I cautiously answered it with the camera aimed away from my face. A face popped up on the screen. It was Ty. I felt so relieved and showed my face, but when I got a better look at him, I noticed he looked different, more tired, paranoid even, and he was in an unfamiliar room. I asked him where he was and why he wasn't answering, to which he replied that he was fine and at home. I asked whose phone he was using, and after a long pause, he just stared blankly into the camera before saying he was using his uncle's phone. That was strange, but before I could ask more, he suddenly demanded that I lend him $10,000 and that he'd pay me back. I laughed until I realized he was serious, his face full of worry. I asked why he needed so much money, but again, there was a long pause. He finally said he had to go, and the call ended. It was one of the weirdest and most unnerving experiences of my life. I'd never seen him act like that. Something was clearly wrong, but it was late, so I figured I'd go over to his house the next day. The following morning, I went straight to his house and rang the doorbell about 10 times. No answer. I gave up, thinking if he wanted to act sketchy, that was on him. But late that night, around the same time, I received another FaceTime call from another unknown number. I answered, and it was Ty again. But this time, he looked awful. His hair was a mess. He had a cut on his forehead and deep bags under his eyes. I didn't understand what was happening. He wouldn't tell me anything, just kept demanding $10,000 to be sent to a random address. I kept refusing until he said something that still haunts me. In a shaky, nervous voice, he said, "Come on, don't point a gun at my back." It hit me like a bullet, especially when I noticed the slightest twitch of his left eye, like a wink. Then the call ended abruptly, and I could only imagine what was happening to him. By some miracle, I remembered the address and sent the cops there immediately. It was an old, abandoned house on a deserted block miles away. They found Ty in the basement, beaten, senseless, and barely alive, but they got to him just in time. The sicko who did this was already long gone. Ty doesn't like to talk about it, but he told me that he was walking home before everything went black, and when he woke up, he was in that dark basement. The pages wouldn't stop turning. My school's library is open until 2 in the morning for idiots like me who don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building, and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main staircase that goes down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and a long hallway with 4 entrances into the stacks. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway, with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down in the stacks working at one of the study desks so I didn't have to keep going upstairs and back down again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had already left. I was pretty zoned out by this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't have much time until it was due, and I was sort of panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast, making that loud whipping noise at the other end of the room. I ignored it for a while, thinking they'd go away, but they just kept doing it. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started to walk over to tell them to knock it off. I got about 3 steps across the room and it just stopped. I sat back down and it was quiet again, only for about 10 minutes before the flipping pages noise started again, only louder, like they'd grabbed a huge book that time. The boy started to get pissed off too and stood up, walking through the bookshelves trying to find them. It kept going, so I got up too and started looking around with him. It got really loud, and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from, so we started walking toward it. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves. No one there. We hadn't seen anyone come into the stacks, and we were on the side of the room with the entrances. No way could anyone have come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again, and we both just slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was just a fan or something in the other room, and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down, and immediately the noises started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag, looked at me, said, "Fuck this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back in the stacks at night, even when there are other people down there. The boy on the corner. My parents are divorced, and I was living with my dad. I'm an only child, so the only time I was around kids my own age was when I was out making friends with kids on the block. There was this one kid that lived on the corner of my block. His name was Tom. I met him while riding my bike, and he strangely invited me over to shoot some hoops with him, so I did. He was a lot older than me. I was 12, and he was 16. I found out after hanging out with him a lot that he was an only child as well, and that he also lived with his dad. At first, I found him very relatable. I gave him my phone number and he would call to hang out. Sometimes he would come over and play video games, but then he started getting weird. He would call non-stop. If I didn't answer, he would begin to leave annoyed messages. He would call 5 or 6 times before coming over and ringing the bell. If my dad wasn't home, I usually didn't answer it, but when he was home, he would force me to hang out with Tom, even though I told him he was creepy. I biked with Tom back down to his house while pretending to listen to him babble on about stupid stuff. This kid would never shut up. I needed to find a way to get him to stop looking for me. Then, for the first time, he invited me into his house. I really didn't want to go in, but it didn't seem like I had a choice. The second I walked in the door, the foul, disgusting odor of his house filled my lungs. Clothes were tossed all over the floor, broken glass in one corner of the room, and what looked like coffee stains on the wall. It was the most disgusting place I'd ever seen. Then a huge, shady-looking man walked out from another room. He looked at me with a very intimidating stare, and I felt myself backing away until Tom introduced him as his father. The man just gave me a big grunt and stomped off into another room. It was official. This kid was a complete creep. I needed to get away from him for good. I decided I didn't even want to be in that house anymore and just made up some excuse to leave. I think I said I forgot I had a doctor's appointment, and at that moment, his smile slowly faded as an unhappy, if not extremely angry, expression crossed his face. He didn't even give me any response. He just looked at me with this unnerving stare. I left in a hurry and ran back down the block to my house. The door was locked, surprisingly. I unlocked it with the key my dad made me carry and found that he wasn't home. I really wanted him to be home. Then I found a little sticky note on the fridge saying he was called into work for a possible storm emergency. That night, before going to sleep, I checked my email for a response from somebody on eBay. But instead, I had about 5 new emails, all titled in capital letters, and they were all sent from an email named tom0999@gmail.com. It was him. I never gave him my email and still have no idea how he got it. One of the emails was titled, "You made a mistake." Another was titled, "I know where you live," and the rest were filled with profanity and threats. I was only 12 and extremely intimidated by this, so I was ready to call my dad, But as soon as I was heading to the kitchen phone, I heard the sound of rustling bushes outside. I opened the blinds of the window that was facing the bushes and was greeted by the face of a huge man who I instantly recognized as Tom's dad. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was already gone. When my dad came home early because of the situation, we went on to get a restraining order as soon as possible. Tom and his dad moved out about a month after that. Someone opened our tent. It was the first time my family ever went camping together. I was 18 at the time. We probably wouldn't have gone if it weren't for my brother and sister, who were still only 11 and happened to be twins. It was mid-July, and I was actually excited to do it. We drove all the way out to the country. We didn't go to a camping site. My dad just parked the car on the side of a quiet road, and we hiked about a mile into the woods until we found a small clearing. We pitched our 2 tents, one for me and my siblings, and one for my parents. When nighttime came, I couldn't sleep at all. Trying to fall asleep in that sleeping bag was like trying to fall asleep on the grass. I just couldn't get comfortable. I spun around for hours, trying to make myself fall asleep. My little brother and sister had been out cold for a long time by then, and then I heard the sound of the zipper to the tent sliding down. I looked up and saw someone poking their head into the tent. I couldn't see who it was. "Dad?" I whispered. Whoever it was quickly pulled their head back out of the tent. "Dad?" I said louder. I could hear movement outside. Whoever it was had stepped away, leaving the tent unzipped. I was so confused. I was sure it was my mom or dad just checking on us. So I crawled out of the tent and walked over to my parents' tent. I unzipped it and crawled inside. My parents were both in their sleeping bags. I shook my dad until he woke up and asked him if he had just checked on us. He said no. I got chills as he said it. I then woke up my mom, hoping it had been her, but she groggily told me she hadn't left the tent either. Goosebumps covered my whole body as I came to the realization that somebody had actually come up to our tent, opened the zipper, and peered inside. A stranger. For all I know, some sort of psycho. I can't even really tell if my parents took me seriously or not, or maybe I just don't remember. But I do remember this. I didn't get a single minute of sleep that night. The Hotel Ghost. My parents were on their honeymoon in Key West when they arrived at their hotel to check in. They were told the room they'd been assigned was non-smoking, so since my dad was a smoker, they asked for a different one. The clerk switched their reservation, and they took the elevator up to their new floor. As soon as the doors opened, the strong smell of fresh paint hit them. Down the hall, a man was painting one of the walls, his brushes and buckets neatly spread around him. As my parents walked past, they greeted him politely, but he didn't respond, didn't even glance at them. It was odd, but they shrugged it off. When they reached their room, the smell of paint was even stronger, so thick in the air that it was hard to breathe. They decided to head back to the front desk and request another room. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked confused and told them there weren't any scheduled paint jobs on that floor that day. Still, she agreed to switch their room again. My parents went back up to grab their luggage, but the painter was gone. Completely. No tools, no cans, no tarp, and no smell of paint. The air was totally clear, as if nothing had ever happened. Within 10 minutes, the entire hallway had changed. They were uneasy, but tried not to overthink it, and moved to their new room. The next morning, as they headed to breakfast, they passed a tour group in the lobby. The guide was describing the hotel's history, and they happened to mention the exact floor my parents had first been assigned to. According to the guide, many years ago, a painter had been working on that floor when he accidentally fell down the elevator shaft to his death. My parents aren't the superstitious type, and they've never been big believers in the paranormal. But that story, combined with what they'd experienced, left them shaken. To this day, they still can't explain what they saw or who they greeted in that hallway. The doll moved by itself. This happened about 7 years ago. ironically on Halloween night. It was pretty late, close to midnight, so all the kids in the neighborhood had already gone home. Even our neighbors across the way had stopped playing their corny Halloween tape. You know, the ones with the creaking door sounds and witch cackling. It was just me and my cousin Q sitting in the living room. Now, my other cousin, who was about 4 years old, had left her doll lying on the floor, face down. It was one of those baby alive dolls or something like that, the ones with the moving eyelids. Q had issues with that doll the moment it was bought. She hated it and said it was creepy. In fact, she often threw it down the basement stairs. I had no problems with it, so it stayed on the floor so my little cousin could pick it up in the morning. It was very quiet for about half an hour until I heard a loud, rasping, shuffling noise that seemed to be coming from outside. It sounded like an older man right outside our window. I turned to Q, who looked back at me. "Did you hear that?" "It's probably the neighbor's tape again," she said. She went back to typing on her computer. It was silent for another minute before we heard the rasping noise again, louder this time. It sounded like the man was trying to say something. I got up from the couch and peeked out the window. Absolutely no one out there, not even in the street. Our neighbor's house was dark. It was as still as any night in our quiet neighborhood. "There's no one out there," I said, looking back to Q. She didn't say anything. I was kind of getting freaked out. Another minute passed, and this time there was whispering, loud whispering. I remember it sounded like a kid and a woman. Q finally looked up from her computer. "It's that doll," she said. Of course she thought it was. She was very superstitious. I gave her a skeptic look. Let me say this, I don't believe in the paranormal. I leaned down and picked up the doll. It was fine. Her eyes were closed. I forgot to say that it had a voice box thing in it, but it didn't have any batteries. I put it back down. "No, it's not. Just leave it alone," I told her. It was silent again. I went back to my seat on the couch. The rasping started again, and I heard the man say something garbled, followed by wheezing. I jumped up from the couch. I was going to see if it was coming from the backyard. Just as I started walking, I noticed that the doll had moved a little. I picked it up again and turned it over. Its eyes were open, and it was heavier than before. I dropped it, and Q threw it down the basement again. I still have no idea what to think. Hugh denies it ever happened, and my little cousin never asked about her doll after that. I saw the doll only one time after that, on the top basement step, lying on its side. This time, I pushed it down the steps. The man in my closet. I remember this just vaguely, since I was little at the time, maybe 7. In my old house, my room had its own floor. It wasn't even supposed to be a bedroom. It was more of an attachment to the attic, a closet-type room. The people who owned the house before us had used it as a playroom for their daughters. My room also had a huge closet door that was attached to the attic. The closet was elevated, so you had to climb a set of wooden stairs to get into it. It had a big sliding door, and it was completely packed with toys and other junk from my childhood. Since I was little, I always got scared of being so separated from the rest of my family and having that huge closet in my room. Then there was this one night. I was lying in bed, still afraid after watching a scary movie with my family, when I heard the sound of a toy fall over up in the closet. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room. They told me there was no one in my closet. They saw how afraid I was, so they let me sleep in their room that night. The next night, I'd kind of forgotten about it, until I heard it again. The sound of a container of Legos spilling out everywhere up in the closet. Again, I ran to my parents' room and told them about it. My dad was starting to grow impatient with me, but he reluctantly agreed to let me sleep in their room again. The next day, my mom and I checked the closet. There it was, a pile of Legos lying on the floor, spilled out of the container. I thought this was proof that somebody had been in my closet, but my mom assured me it had simply fallen over. That night, my dad locked his door. He said he was tired of my nonsense. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there completely silent. my young imagination running wild, waiting for another sound to come from the closet. It was probably about an hour before it happened. It broke the silence. The sound of the closet door rolling open with force. The moonlight shining through my window illuminated the figure standing by my closet door. I let out the most horrific, ear-piercing scream you've ever heard as pure terror swept over my body, a feeling that I still remember today. The figure jumped down from the closet and ran out of my room and out the front door of my house. My mom ran up to my room in shock as my dad ran downstairs trying to catch whoever it was, but he never did. The police never caught the man. The body on the trail. It was near Halloween when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. One of my friends said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She mentioned she didn't like sharing it since it was actually true, but we convinced her to go on. To cut to the chase, her parents had a nice, if slightly awkward, first date. Around the time they would have said goodnight, the guy, my friend's dad, suggested they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He knew the area well, having done a fair amount of rock climbing there. So the two of them drove up to the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and began hiking under the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the man started getting a bad feeling. The path ahead, which ran under a cluster of trees, looked especially dark, and it was getting quite late. He tried to brush off the uneasy feeling and kept going. A minute later, the same dread came over him again. Ignoring it once more, he walked a little farther into the trees, until his foot hit something soft, lying in the middle of the path. It was too dark to see what it was, but the awful feeling surged back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what he had stepped on, he and the woman decided to turn around and hurry back to their cars. Years later, after they'd been married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer Ted Bundy. In response to a question about the time he came closest to being caught, Bundy described a night when he had lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard people coming up the trail. He said he hid in the trees just in time to see a man walk right into the body. Then, for some reason, simply turn around and walk away. The door was already open. It was 4 a.m. on a Saturday night. I woke up to my stomach rumbling, and nothing is worse than trying to sleep on an empty stomach. So I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen to make a sandwich, but immediately I noticed that the cabinet was open. I'm always super obsessive about closing everything I open, so I couldn't believe that I had done that. I found it more odd than most people would. That's just how I am. Most people would shut the cabinet and forget about it. But I went as far as investigating around the house for any unwanted guests. There was nobody in any of the closets I checked, but when I went down to the den, the back door was wide open. I was certain now that someone had been in my house. Somehow, I had the nerve to step outside and turn on the patio light, and there was somebody sitting in one of the patio chairs. He looked at me with a blank expression and got up slowly. He looked filthy, almost homeless, his hair down to his shoulders. He started walking closer to me. I couldn't tell what his intentions were, and I just stood there, almost taking him as harmless. But then he suddenly lunged at me, and I barely had time to shut the door and lock it. We stared each other down for 10 seconds through the glass until I finally realized I should be taking that time to call the cops. I ran to the kitchen to get the phone, and as I was dialing, I noticed when I got back that he was already gone. I still called the cops, but nothing was ever found of the man. The shadows. Outside my window. I was up late reading on a cold night. My bedroom is on the first floor, and I live alone in a relatively quiet, wooded area. For that reason, many of my windows didn't have blinds, since people driving by couldn't really see inside. Besides, I like waking up to sunlight shining into my room, but that one night made me regret never getting blinds. After turning off my reading lamp to get some sleep, I had about 2 minutes of silence before hearing something hit the window. It sounded like a single tap from a person's fist. I was facing away and didn't want to turn around. I was used to hearing branches brush against the walls and windows, but this sound was different. It was a clear knock, flesh on glass. The thought that someone might be outside watching me froze my blood. Who would walk all the way onto my property, right up to my bedroom window? I tried to convince myself it was just a branch, but a second, distinct knock shattered that hope. Someone was definitely outside. I figured if I ignored it, they'd go away. Maybe some punk trying to mess with me. If they thought I was asleep, they'd get bored. But another knock came, and I tried to stay completely still, pretending not to notice. When a fourth knock came, steady and deliberate, I decided enough was enough. I'd confront this jerk like a man. I turned toward the window and just barely caught a glimpse of a dark shadow darting beneath it. That glimpse killed whatever courage I had left. I bolted to the kitchen phone and called the police. They said an officer would be there in 10 minutes. When I hung up, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Turning my head, I saw someone standing outside the kitchen window, staring in at me. Just for a second before he took off. Someone was watching me through every window. Then my phone rang. It was my neighbor, also my best friend. He said he'd just seen 3 people dressed in black walking onto my property, one of them holding something shiny and sharp. Panic took over. I ran upstairs into the bathroom where there were no windows and locked the door. Moments later, I heard single knocks at the front door. Slow, deliberate. No way that was the police. I prayed they'd get there in time. Thankfully, the knocking stopped, followed by loud pounding and someone shouting, "Police!" It really was them. But whoever those men were had already vanished into the woods. Maybe there were more than 3. I don't even know. All I know is they were never caught, and I bought blinds for every window that same week. The tenant next door. I moved into a house that my aunt and uncle had been renting out for several years after they built a new place. I spent a few months alone before a buddy from work asked if I was looking for a roommate. I thought about it for a few days and ended up allowing him to move in. It was a 2-bedroom place with a den and an office in the garage. He decided he wanted his own space, as the bedrooms were right next to each other, so he moved his stuff into the office in the garage. I have to admit, it was a pretty cool setup he had. The only problem was he didn't have a bathroom or kitchen out there, so he would use the kitchen and toilet in the house. We worked different schedules, so I would often leave the house unlocked for him. One night, I went to my girlfriend's house for dinner. After I got back, I decided to grab a 6-pack of beer I had bought the previous night. When I opened the fridge, my beer was gone. I assumed it was my roommate and went into a blind rage. I stormed out into the garage and slammed his bedroom door open. He was sleeping and rolled over. I screamed at him, asking why he drank my beer without asking. He said he didn't touch my beer and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. Having lived with him for a while, I was pretty good at judging when he was lying, and I felt he was telling the truth. My heart sank as I came to the realization that somebody had stolen our beer from the fridge and whatever else. We went back into the house and made sure everything was in its place. The TV was there, all the furniture too. It wasn't until I went into my bedroom and realized my $2,000 laptop was gone that we began to panic. My buddy called the cops, and we searched high and low for the beer and laptop, thinking I might have misplaced them. We soon gave up and began to search the yard for whoever had done this. We didn't live alone in this house, though. There was a room that had been built on several years after the house was first built. My aunt's dying mother had spent her last couple of years living there, as it was easy for my aunt and uncle to care for her during her sickness. When she died, they began renting the room out to a strange woman before eventually moving out themselves and renting the rest of the house. The woman remained there until we moved in, and my aunt and uncle had their concerns about her. They believed she was a drug addict, which became evident to us during our stay there. She behaved erratically, and we would hear strange noises from her end of the house at all hours of the night. Her brother moved in several months after we did, which was strange because her place was a 1-bedroom suite. We figured he just slept on the couch or something. He was even weirder than her, though. He wouldn't acknowledge me when I pulled up into the driveway while he was sitting having a smoke. Trying to make conversation with him was pointless. He basically just stared through your soul. One night he even asked my roommate if he could score him drugs. That night, during our search for the burglar, we went out to the garage door, only to find bare footprints in the snow. The footprints led from their suite door to our garage door. We put two and two together and began banging on their door. We said we knew it was him and that he'd better answer the door. Someone inside lifted the curtain and made eye contact with me, which, to this day, still gives me chills. The cops showed up and took down all our information. They scoured the house and found nothing and no one. We showed them the footprints and explained that the people living in the suite were drug addicts. We gave the officers their names. They ran them in their cruiser and came back to inform us that the man had a warrant in another province and had been convicted of breaking and entering several years back. The cops knocked on their door for several minutes and identified themselves as police officers, but to no avail. They informed us that because the warrant was from out of province and technically the man hadn't committed a new crime, there was nothing they could do about it. The cops left, and it was 1 a.m., so my roommate and I went to bed. The door that connected the two weirdos' suite and my part of the house could only be locked from their side of the door, something I completely forgot before falling asleep. During the night, I heard footsteps outside my door and a few loud bangs. My doorknob began to shake violently. I was barely awake and brushed it off as my roommate. Luckily, I always lock my bedroom door at night. The next morning, I asked my roommate what was so important at 3 a.m. that he would need to try and get into my room. He told me he'd slept through the night and hadn't even gotten up to go to the bathroom. My heart sank. I told him what had happened during the night. I have never been more glad that I locked my door every night due to some silly childhood fear that I've held onto into adulthood. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I'd left my bedroom door open and that man had gotten into my room. Needless to say, my buddy and I moved out of that place a few weeks later. He smiled in the dark. This happened when I still had my fishing boat, a horrifying experience that will never leave us. My wife and I set out from the East Coast for a 2-day fishing trip in the North Atlantic. The first day and night were normal. We got a decent catch, and later we played cards while listening to music. Everything felt calm and peaceful, up until the next night. After a slow day at sea, we were sitting inside, playing cards again, this time without music. That's when we heard the faint sound of a boat motor. We rushed outside and saw a man piloting an old, beat-up motorboat with no lights on. He stopped directly in front of our bow. He looked to be middle-aged, with a beard and a baseball cap. I called out, asking if he needed help. He asked if we had any spare gasoline. I told him no, and then asked if he was low on fuel or needed a ride back to shore. He shook his head and said, "Got plenty of gas." That answer didn't make sense, and silence hung between us. The way he just stared at me, blankly, motionless, sent chills through both of us. The only reason I could see him at all was because of our deck light. Beyond that, it was total darkness. Finally, he broke the silence and asked if we'd had a good catch that day. I said no, still trying to sound polite, even though the whole thing felt wrong. I asked how he was navigating without lights, and he just chuckled, like I'd told a joke. Then he turned his little boat around and said, "Nice meeting you folks," before disappearing into the black water. My wife whispered that she was scared he might try to rob us. I tried to brush it off, but deep down I knew something about that man was off. The timing, the location, the way he acted. It didn't add up. Just to be safe, I turned off our lights and sailed a bit north to make sure he couldn't find us again. Call me paranoid. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the blood-curdling scream of my wife. I shot up and saw a man standing at the edge of our bed. The same man. I lunged for him, but before I could reach him, he bolted out of the cabin. A second later, I heard the familiar sputter of that motorboat starting up, then fading into the darkness. We didn't hesitate. We sailed straight back to shore and called the police. They searched, but there was no trace of him or his boat. Nothing was ever found. To this day, we have no idea what he wanted or what he planned to do, and that thought still keeps me up at night. The dark corner. The way my bedroom was laid out was that across the room from my bed, there was a small alcove that didn't receive any light because of the closet positioned slightly in front of it, blocking both the ceiling light and any ambient light from outside when it was dark. I was in my 4th year of high school, trying to fall asleep but couldn't. You know that feeling when it seems like someone's staring at you? I was feeling it. I couldn't shake it, and it felt like whatever was watching me had pure, malicious intent. I opened my eyes, and my gaze was immediately drawn to that dark corner of the room, where I saw a hazy, darker outline within it. Goosebumps spread across my arms, but I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination. I closed my eyes again, forcing myself to sleep, but the feeling of that evil stare wouldn't leave me. Then, I heard a creaking sound, the sound of someone putting pressure on the floorboards. I opened my eyes again, and that shadowy figure was now in the opposite corner of the room. Every instinct inside me went into panic. I threw my pillow and blanket over my head, crying quietly and praying that whatever it was wouldn't come closer. I know I didn't imagine or dream it, and it still sends chills down my spine to this day. Behind the sliding door. It happened on my friend's 21st birthday. We were throwing him a big party filled with alcohol. There were a lot of people I didn't know there, and the house was chaotic. Probably around 100 people. Even in all that noise, I noticed one strange man who stood out. He was older, sitting alone in the corner, quietly watching everyone drink and dance. At first, I assumed he was someone's dad or uncle, but as the night wound down and most guests left, he was still there, by himself, in the same spot. I asked one of my friends who he was, but no one knew. We decided to wait until the house was empty, thinking he'd leave too. When the last guests were gone, we went back to the living room, and sure enough, he was gone. I felt relieved, even though it wasn't my house. Something about him had just felt wrong. That night, a few of us stayed over. I crashed on the couch in the den. Falling asleep was easy with all the alcohol in my system, but staying asleep wasn't. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty and needing the bathroom. I went first to the bathroom, then to the kitchen for water. When I returned to the den and lay back down, I noticed that the sliding door of the coat closet across from me was slightly open. It was too dark to see inside, but the sight sent chills down my spine as I remembered the strange man from earlier. The idea of him hiding in that closet hit me instantly. I froze, pretending to sleep, convinced he was watching me through the crack. My heart pounded as I planned my escape. If I jumped over the other couch, I'd land near the stairs and make it to the living room. Then the door slid open a little more. That was all it took. I bolted, leapt over the couch, and sprinted upstairs. Behind me, I heard the closet door fully slide open and footsteps pounding after me. I screamed for my friends to wake up. They all sat up, dazed and confused, staring at me. We outnumbered whoever it was 4-1 now, so I turned toward the stairs and waited. But no one came. I told them what I'd seen, that the creepy man from the party was hiding in the closet. Just then, we heard the back door downstairs creak open. We stared at each other in silence. We called the cops, but the man was never found. He had vanished into the night. When I was in college in North Carolina, I worked nights at a local TJ Maxx to earn extra cash. Since I had classes during the day, I always worked the late shifts. One night, around 11 or 11:30, I was walking to my car. As part of store policy, all employees left together, while the security guard watched from the sidewalk to make sure we got to our cars safely. I was approaching my car when I heard another vehicle pull up behind me. I turned and saw a woman with a teenage girl in the passenger seat. The woman rolled down her window and started telling me a story about how they had just come into town to visit family, had run out of gas, and had no money. She asked if I could lend them a few dollars. I told her the truth. I never carry cash. She stared at me for a moment, then hurriedly asked if I could get into the car with them, go to a gas station, and buy them about $10 worth of gas. I immediately said no, but she kept insisting. That's when I noticed the daughter beside her, silently watching me. She was licking her lips and wringing her fingers. Something about her expression felt deeply wrong. My instincts kicked in, and I turned and ran back to the store, where the security guard still stood. Their car had pulled up behind mine, blocking me in. But when the guard started walking toward them, they sped off into the night. The face in the dark. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to my cousin, and yet it still freaks me out just thinking about it. My cousin Nicky was on Skype with his girlfriend Sam at around 1 in the morning on a Friday night. She was asking him to come over and stay the night, but he didn't really want to drive that late. Sometime during their conversation, Nicky noticed that the closet door behind Sam had opened just a crack. He pointed it out, and Sam turned to look at the closet. They both brushed it off, thinking nothing of it. About half an hour later, the closet door creaked open even more. Nicky spotted it again and joked that her little brother must be hiding in there. Sam denied it and said the window was open or something, so maybe there was a draft. Another half hour passed, and the closet door slowly opened all the way. Then someone stepped out of the closet and walked right out of Sam's bedroom. Sam didn't seem to notice, but Nicky froze in shock at what he had just seen. He told her that her little brother had just come out of the closet, but what she said next made his blood run cold. She told him she was home alone that night. Nicky started yelling at her through the screen, telling her to lock the door and call the police, saying he was on his way. Sam suddenly began to realize what was happening, turned toward the doorway, and saw the closet door completely open. She ran to the door, let out a blood-curdling scream, slammed it shut, and locked it. Nicky drove over as fast as he could while calling the police. When he arrived, the front door was wide open. He ran inside, straight to Sam's room, knocking and calling out that it was him, but she didn't respond. When the police finally arrived, they broke the door down and found her curled up in the corner, trembling and in shock. Later, she told the police that before she shut the door, she saw someone standing face to face with her in the doorway. The piano note. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip called the Louisiana Tour. It was a week of visiting historical and cultural sites across southern Louisiana. One of our stops was the Myrtles Plantation, which is said to be one of the most haunted places in the United States. The house had that old, heavy feeling the moment we stepped inside. Quiet, still, and strangely cold. There were all kinds of ghost stories told about the place, but one moment from that visit has stuck with me ever since. Our group was standing in one of the parlor rooms while the tour guide was talking. I don't even remember what about. As I stood there, I began to hear the faint sound of someone hitting a single piano key. Just one note at a time. It was soft at first, then again a few seconds later. I looked around, expecting to see an old piano nearby, but there wasn't one in sight. I turned to my friends and asked if they heard it. They said no. I heard the sound again, clear as day, and told them, "There it is again." They just stared at me like I was imagining things. Feeling uneasy, I looked around the room again. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the tour guide except for one woman standing across the group. She caught my eye and, without saying anything, pointed at me and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too. I nodded. Her expression changed, like she was relieved but also scared. Then, right at that moment, the tour guide began telling a story about a Confederate soldier who had died there, a man known to have played the piano in that very room. She said that guests often reported hearing him play a few random keys late at night, just before something strange would happen. I remember feeling every hair on my arm stand up. When the tour ended and we were leaving the room, I found that same woman and asked if she really heard it too. She said yes, exactly what I had heard. But her husband and son hadn't heard a thing. I still don't know how to explain it. The Man in the Storm. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of storm I loved, with thunder and lightning roaring through the sky. I was staying up late watching movies. I lived with my dad, but he wasn't home that night. He worked nights. After finishing Forrest Gump for what felt like the 100th time, I decided that 2 a.m. was a good time to finally get some sleep. I loved falling asleep during thunderstorms. The sound was comforting, but suddenly I heard something hit my window. It wasn't the patter of rain. This sound was different. Still, I brushed it off, assuming it was just the storm, and laid my head back down. A few seconds later, another hit. This time, it sounded like a rock striking the glass. My heart started racing. It couldn't be my dad. He would have called first. Then another rock hit. I froze, glued to my bed, terrified to look out the window. Whoever was outside surely knew I was there. I had just turned off the TV, and they could have seen the light through the glass. I decided to ignore it, hoping they'd go away. But then the rocks came faster, one after another. The rain began to lighten, and that's when I heard it. The sound of a truck engine idling out on the street. A loud thud hit the window again, harder this time, and that's where I drew the line. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs to call the police. As I passed the front door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through the small glass window at the top of the door, there was a face, someone staring in at me, smiling. I sprinted to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and called the cops. They told me an officer was nearby and would arrive soon. Meanwhile, whoever was outside started jiggling the doorknob, then ramming the door, trying to break in. I grabbed a knife for protection and shouted that the police were coming before running back upstairs to my room. After about a minute, the pounding stopped, and there were no more rocks hitting my window. I didn't dare look outside, but I heard the sound of the truck driving off. A few minutes later, I heard sirens, and then the doorbell rang. I explained everything to the officer, describing the face as best as I could, but I couldn't give any details about the vehicle. I still regret not taking one quick look. There was never enough information for the police to find whoever it was. I don't know if they intended to rob the house, or something much worse. Beneath the bed. This is a very weird story that took place a few months ago, and I still live in the same house where it happened. There's an electrical outlet under my bed that I use to charge my phone, and every night I leave my phone on the ledge above my bed, using it as my alarm. But something strange started happening on a Monday night in February. I woke up to my alarm blasting. It was still dark out. My actual alarm clock on the desk showed 4 a.m. I figured maybe I'd accidentally set a new alarm. The alarm on my phone was titled Down. I turned it off and went back to sleep, not thinking much of it. The next night, it happened again. The alarm went off at 3 a.m., and the title read, Beneath. I knew for sure I hadn't set that. Maybe my brother was playing a joke on me. The next morning, I told my dad to tell him to cut it out, since it was interrupting my sleep on school nights. But my brother swore he hadn't touched my phone, and I believed him. That night, I set a password on my phone, wrote it on a sticky note for safety, and hid the note on the wall behind my bed. I double-checked. Only one alarm set for 8 a.m. I went to sleep. But again, I woke up in total darkness to the alarm blasting at 2 a.m. The title this time was The. Now I was officially freaked out. Someone had to be hacking my phone. The next day, I kept it powered off all day, hoping whoever was messing with it would lose interest. That night, I used my regular alarm clock instead and went to bed. When I woke up, there was no sunlight again, and my alarm clock wasn't ringing. Instead, I heard my phone going off from the ledge. It had somehow been moved there. The sound wasn't my usual marimba tone, but a distorted screaming noise. The alarm title said bed. It was 1 a.m. I lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My phone battery was low, about 10%. So I reached down to find the charger that was usually plugged in under my bed. It wasn't there. And then, at that moment, it hit me. The alarm titles formed a sentence. Down, beneath the bed. My heart stopped. I yanked my arm back, but before I could, a hand shot out from under the bed and grabbed my arm tight. I screamed at the top of my lungs, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. My parents came running. My dad burst into the room with a baseball bat and saw me being pulled toward the edge of the bed. He reached under, grabbed the man hiding there, and hit him hard enough to knock him out before calling the police. The man had basically trapped himself under my bed. The police arrived and identified him as a registered sex offender who had been arrested multiple times. They said he was extremely disturbed, someone who got pleasure from tormenting and terrifying his victims. The night shift. Working the night shift always sucked. I work in an office building and would constantly do the night shift since it was the only time that worked for me. I was almost always the only person on the floor I worked on, possibly in the whole building. There was always a kind of eerie feeling to being in such a big place with most of the lights out and absolutely no one around. But on the upside, it was peaceful, less stressful, and I was able to get a lot of work done. There was this one night though. It was a Friday, around 2 in the morning. I was typing away on my keyboard when I heard a noise from outside my cubicle. It sounded like just a random crack from the walls or something. It was unusual in this building, but I didn't get too concerned about it. I resumed typing and was once again interrupted by a sound. This time, the sound of a computer starting up. It caught me off guard. I was sure nobody else was working the night shift. I stood up on my chair to get a view over the cubicle walls. The glare of a computer screen in the dark was visible on a cubicle on the opposite side of the room. Then I did something stupid, something I regret. I asked if there was anybody there, yelling it out and hoping to get an answer from a fellow employee. But instead, I saw the glaring light of the computer monitor across the room turn off, and once again, there was nothing but darkness on that side. I started getting nervous. I turned off my lamp and computer screen so that I wouldn't give away my position to whoever that was. I crouched down and tiptoed out across to a nearby cubicle. There was utter silence. I sat waiting for something to happen for God knows how long, but eventually decided the coast was clear. I tiptoed down past all the cubicles until I reached the opening near the exit door to the stairs and elevators. And that's when I realized that my fearful suspicion was true. There was a man crouched down behind a plant in the corner of the room, dressed in all black. I felt my heart sink as I noticed him, but it didn't seem like he knew that I saw him. I turned back to the stairway door. There was no way I was going to wait for the elevator and take that chance. I casually opened the door, closed it behind me, and started walking down the stairs. After making it down about 2 flights, I heard the door above me push open aggressively, followed by manic, echoing footsteps coming fast down the stairs. I raced down as fast as I could, all while the footsteps above me were getting louder. I finally made it to the first floor, sprinted through the lobby, and out the front door. Whoever was in there didn't follow me. I immediately called the cops, along with one of my bosses. My boss said no one was scheduled to work except for me. The cops scanned the place from top to bottom, but there was no one in there. I couldn't help them out with any description other than that he was wearing all black. I continued to do the night shift for about a week after that, with my boss allowing me to lock all possible entrances to the floor, including the elevators, but I still wasn't comfortable with it. So ever since, I've been doing the day shifts. The library. After midnight. My school's library is open until 2 in the morning for idiots like me who don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building, and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main staircase that goes down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and a long hallway with 4 entrances leading inside. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway, with rows of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down in the stacks working at one of the desks to avoid going upstairs and back down again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had already left. I was pretty zoned out by this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't have much time left, and I was panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast, making that loud whipping noise at the other end of the room. I ignored it for a while, thinking they'd stop, but they didn't. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started walking over to tell them to knock it off. I got about 3 steps across the room, and it just stopped. I sat back down, and it was quiet again, only for about 10 minutes before the page-flipping noise started again, louder this time, like they'd grabbed a huge book. The boy started getting pissed off too. He stood up and began walking around through the bookshelves, trying to find whoever it was. It kept going, so I got up too and started looking with him. It got really loud, and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from, so we started walking toward it. He was on one side of the shelves, and I was on the other. We walked all the way down. No one there. We hadn't seen anyone come into the stacks, and we were right by the entrances. There was no way anyone could have come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again, and we both just slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was a fan or something mechanical in the next room, and I really needed to finish my essay. We sat down, and immediately the noises started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff into his bag, looked at me, said, "Fuck this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back into the stacks at night, even when there are other people down there.